All right, we are good. Welcome everyone to Skokie Public Library Board Meeting Wednesday, October 16th. Calling to order. Any comments from observers?
There were no comments from us.
Welcome, Ella. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Very good. All right, then let's move to the minutes of the regular and closed meeting. We're just added to your materials today, so hopefully people get a chance to peek at them. They're relatively straightforward. Let's start with the closed meeting minutes. Any discussion about the closed meeting minutes? If not, can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? And when we have someone attending remotely, all votes have to be by roll call. So even though it's not money, we have to all. So Mary?
I saw that when we were reviewing the policy
Exactly.
for this week. I was like, oh, yeah, so I say yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
I'm yes. Shabna?
Yes.
Yes.
And Ella?
Yes.
So that passes 6-0. Discussion of the minutes from last month's regular meeting.
There was a, do you want to say or should I?
Oh, please
There was a suggestion for two of the items where it was, where it stated the item was tabled. If we just add a little bit more to that to indicate what that means, that it was tabled for further discussion at the next meeting, just to be clear in case someone doesn't know what that means exactly. So
Okay.
if that's okay with the board, we can amend it. That would be.
I assume there's no objection to that, so I want to make a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, voting individually, Mary,
Yes.
Michelle,
Yes.
I'm yes, Shabna,
Yes.
Mira,
Yes.
Ella,
Yes.
that passes 6-0 also. Moving on to Director's Report, page 3.
Hey, good evening, everyone. It's good to see everyone. I think the report is fairly short. The third floor renovation update is there for you. We're making progress on the transitional steps that are required for us to evacuate, kind of give up the third floor to the construction firm and or our construction manager on October 2nd. So Laura and others, and Susie and others are hard at work with all the logistics involved with that. So thank you want to thank them for that hard work. We have, as you know, we have an agenda item to discuss a potential lease for the temporary office space. That's been taking up a lot of our time over the past couple of weeks as well. So I'll discuss that further with the board later on. We're on track otherwise, so there's just a lot of work between now and October. The Backlot Bash is on August 25th and 27th. It's always a fun event. I always like to mention it just to encourage our trustees to be present at least a part of the weekend. I'm usually there for 1 or 2 days or nights for the raffle ticket sale and the Rotary Pancake Breakfast. So if you have any questions about that, please let me know. That's also the weekend where the Sunday, because the farmer's market, which is normally held on the other side of the library, can't be held there. It's held in the library parking lot. So there is a little bit of work that needs to take place to prepare for that and make sure that our patrons have access to the building when we open at 12. So.
But 5K starting, like I know I participated in the 5K last year. I remember it was outside the building and then it ends here. So I'm assuming that's all accommodated for.
Yeah, it's always like that. And
Okay.
so everyone knows that weekend, if you don't want to deal with parking issues and traffic,
Great.
walk to the library. Yeah. Also, the volunteer luncheon, please, if you can, try to join. I know it's a Sunday. But it's from 11:30 to about 1:30 and should be a nice event. It's always good to celebrate and just acknowledge our volunteers. some of which are here in this room as board members of the library. So it's a nice lunch that we provide, and then there's entertainment. This year it's going to be 2 of our staff members who are performing music. So yeah, it should be nice. So, and then the Blue Point installation, that's, if you recall, the name of the emergency notification alert system that the board approved a few months ago. So there was a little waiting period to get in the schedule and the queue of when they can install. And so actually it's happening this week, and I already see in different places around the library that they're installing the pull stations for that system. So once that happens, we'll receive training and get staff all updated before turning the system on. So things are running smoothly there. So that's it for me. Do you have any
Richard, when
questions?
do you expect the Blue Point system to be up and running?
This week, they should be finishing the installation, I believe, this week, or maybe they'll go into next week a little bit, and then I expect to have training done, so perhaps sometime in September, hopefully we'll be able to turn it on. Yep.
Other questions about director's report? Hearing none, we'll move on to approval of the disbursement. Pages 4 to 11, any questions, comments about the disbursement items? I had one just curiosity on page 6, 6160, business expense to St. Paul Lutheran Church.
That's the parking lot lease that we pay quarterly for supplemental parking for our staff.
I thought it was St. Peter.
No, that's the one off of Gallatin Park here.
Got it.
So it's the parking lot behind the church.
Yep, got it. Okay.
Just for a little more context for those who weren't here when we started that lease, it's to free up more parking spots for our patrons by having some of our staff park in that lot. So.
Other questions? If not, motion to approve the disbursements.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All right, since it's money, we'll vote individually. Ella?
Yes.
Mira?
Yes.
Shabnam?
Yes.
I'll vote yes. Michelle?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
That all passes 6-0. We're moving on to the consent agenda, pages 12 through 40. Questions or comments about the consent agenda?
When I was just looking at the numbers, obviously I just keep looking at the bookmobile, and something I brought up to Richard just for transparency with everybody else is looking at, especially with school starting back up again, just kind of re-looking at our outreach with schools, not with the bookmobile, maybe even beyond the bookmobile, just to get more engaged with kids. I think it's a good time to start looking at that type of engagement again. Help with numbers, and I think it will just help spread the good word of the library.
And just a quick comment on that, and I shared this with Mary as well. We have a terrific school services librarian or liaison to regularly throughout the year. That's her primary job, is to work with the schools, the school librarians in particular, media specialists there, and we're always building that and maintaining those relationships with the schools. So there's always year-long dialogue, not just right before the school year. And then the bookmobile does have a couple of traditional ongoing long-term school stops, but I mentioned to Mary that with the bookmobile in particular, we're embarking on some new exploration of like what the strategy is there, because COVID interrupted so much of our bookmobile service. It's a good time to reflect back on what we've done, but also analyze what we can do for especially the morning and weekend slots. So.
Richard, I have a question, and you probably talked about this before, but for example, senior homes, we service them. as well, do we?
We have in the past, there have been some, I believe one we cycled off because of inactivity, but yes, we engage with those stops as potential stops as well.
And is it through the bookmobile that we do that? Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Right. Okay.
Any other?
Other questions and motion to approve consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
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 All right, then. Voting, Shabna,
Yes.
Mira,
Yes.
Ella,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
I'm yes as well, so that also passes 6-0. Thank you. Which gets us to the art acquisition policy, starting on page 40.
Yes, so as I mentioned in my memo, this, if you recall early, I can't remember when exactly, but at some point earlier in the year, there was a discussion about our acquisitions policy and how there was interest from the board as well as the staff in restarting or refreshing our approach to the art in the library in terms of the permanent collections. So Van Rosenbaum is here. Van was here when that discussion took place, and I know Noreen and Mary initially expressed interest in joining like a small task force, if you will, to discuss and kind of come up with a refreshed policy, but also think a little bit about how we might engage the public with public art. So Van is here again to discuss our progress, and also Amy Kuster.
Mostly Amy.
Well, both of them contributed a lot, as well as Nancy Kim Phillips and Mary and Noreen, as I said earlier. So I have before you a draft of a potential art acquisitions policy. It's much different from the former one. It's basically started from scratch, and I rewrote that, but there are some key questions that I would like to engage the board in discussion, if it's okay tonight, to possibly amend the draft if the board would like. But also Amy's here to share a little bit more about the insights gained from some of these pop-up experiences that Van and Amy created to learn more about what the public thinks of our public art. So first, let's turn it over to Amy, and then we can have a discussion if that's okay.
All right, I have slides. Well, it's art, right? It's visual. All right. Ella, hopefully you're able to see it on your screen as well. All right. Whoops, there we go. Title slide. So it was really important to the entire work group to better understand where the community's thoughts and feelings are with regard to art, sorts of things they find engaging. Because again, if we're going to use public funds on this, as part of our policy, we want it to be informed by the community. So Van and I put together a couple of pop-ups there where we really focused on, will it let me do it? You got it? Thank you, okay. We ended up doing 4 different pop-ups, including during some busier service hours, including one of the Wednesdays on the Green in July. We really focused on trying to show pieces that were representative of a variety of different art styles, media, and really having questions to ask, what do people find interesting? What makes them want to stop and explore more? And then we captured what their responses were. And both of us didn't really have a great sense of what we would find. So in a lot of ways, we were surprised how much cohesion there was across all of the different folks we talked to. And it really spanned, at least for me, really young. Like, I think my youngest was a 4th grader up through older adults. I did one right after one of our Friday afternoon films. So older adults coming out of that typically. So just some examples of some of the art we had. Yes, those eyes are moving. Just wanted to kind of give you a sense. A lot of these were based on the conversation that the work group had, looking at different types of styles, again, to get a sense of what the community might find appealing. So some like textiles, yeah, and then the questions, what catches your eye, what makes you want to look more? So what we ended up finding, again, we found a lot more cohesion than I think either of us were anticipating. You clicked things again. There we go. Okay, so, oh, now you have to move the.
Colleen's working hard tonight.
All right.
Thank you, Colleen.
Good, okay, so in terms of art style preferences, overwhelmingly, priority was figurative and realistic. The sense that like people wanted something that they could like immediately recognize and connect to, and very little relative interest in abstract and modern, which we found really interesting. Van in particular.
Definitely the modern.
Because you love that.
Yeah.
I'm figurative, so.
There were some of the abstract that had a little bit more things going on that people were drawn to, but like that one with just the gray pencil squares, people, almost everybody was like, no. And they hated all the ones that I chose to put in there. So this is a good thing for me. I tried to get pull pieces from like things that are being shown in the world right now and not things that people would recognize, so they weren't going back to something else, so they would be experiencing it in our pop-up like they might be on our walls.
Right.
But the choices were very random about what but other than being trying to hit
Representative,
different
yeah.
types of things and styles and technology.
But acknowledging that like we're not gonna get a day off, right? That's a lot of money. So trying to have
that pop and graffiti and landscape, I mean, I know they're smaller,
Yeah.
but to me, I like seeing like these 4 large swatches there because it's a quite
Yeah.
nice variety right
Yes.
there, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that's really cool.
Yes.
So no, abstract and modern might not be a priority, but I like seeing that we have some second place finishers there that have a lot of potential to add variety to the collection.
Yes.
You know, and I do think it's important to remember too that although they might not be leaning towards abstract or modern, you know, or even pop and landscape, but the importance of still including things that are not a preference, I think is very important to continue to represent those and, you know, not necessarily cater to all of the preferences of the public.
Yeah. So looking at the different media, painting and textiles were the 2 most popular. There were a couple of different examples of textiles, both like flat and slightly more 3-dimensional. The printmaking and photography were the least engaging for the folks we ended up speaking with. And again, like speaking to Michelle's point, we spoke with a number of people, but in theory, this process, when it comes to actually selecting pieces, could engage community members again.
How many people?
We had a little over 40, I believe. Yeah, so. And then just more generally, the 3 big trends in what inspired folks to be interested in spending more time with a piece versus another. Color was huge. Texture, both the actual texture, like for some of the textiles, but also the appearance of texture, so that sort of like depth was really intriguing to people. And then a lot of folks shared things along the lines of it's something familiar, it reminds me of something. A lot of like, thankfully no one cried, but there was like, oh yeah, it reminds me of my mom, and like, it was just really intriguing to me how immediate that sort of connection was for folks for some pieces. One of the other things that we've talked about in the work group is how to engage the community with our public art. And it definitely feels like we're on the right track with that as an impulse, because one of the things that Van specifically heard that I think is just an interesting thing for us to be aware of is that people don't necessarily think of the library for art. So there was one person in particular who said people who don't come to the library to look at art. And maybe it's not the first thing to think of, but I've already been working with our info services team and then Van's team, because we're gonna have stuff on the website to have little, like, explore more about 3 existing pieces in the permanent collection so far. Once all 3 are live, we're gonna make a short, like, self-guided tour to, you know, encourage people to just, you know, go on a little scavenger hunt. So, and thinking about how we connect programming and passive opportunities for folks to engage, because this was an outlier. Everyone else was very excited to talk to us about this, but there's an opportunity for us to maybe make this a little bit more accessible for others. That's what we found. Those are our slides.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Pam.
Maybe this is a great opportunity to, you know, integrate social media too, right? So getting them to draw people into the library specifically for that, you know, would be really a great way to get the gate count up and people through the doors, you know,
Yeah.
for something that they wouldn't typically say,
Yeah.
oh, I'm gonna go check this out. You know? And it's one of those things that maybe they might have seen but didn't really stop to think about it, process it, talk about it. Thank you, this was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Couple questions. How big is our art collection and how much of it is in storage versus out?
That is a great question. I know it was part of an early packet that we had probably like 7-8 months ago, so I'm not recalling immediately. I know there's a fair number of things in storage that we need to move from the 3rd floor by October 2nd.
My question is, where is storage? So
Yes.
it's stored, it's on the 3rd floor or something?
Yes, 3rd floor in a secure, locked area. It's not just key fob, it's a lock.
What's any sense of what percent of our collection's in storage versus out?
I can get back to you on
I
the
just
specific
didn't
numbers.
know general.
But yeah, the total, according to our appraisal from the last one we did, which was several years ago, the total number of articles appraised was 54. And I would say, I don't have a percentage that's displayed, but maybe a little over half might be displayed.
Like
I was
30
thinking-
pieces?
Yeah.
Yeah, as well.
Including sculptural work, hanging work, you know, and work that's also displayed in our offices, because some of them are in staff spaces as well. So when the renovation happened, afterwards, one of the last things we did with Andrew Berman and his colleagues, after the renovation was completed, we assessed where we would be able to place as much of our collection as possible, and so it went in various places. Like if you look down certain stacks, the idea was to, like, if you look down a stack above, you would see an image, or obviously on some of the open walls that we have. A lot of the items that were displayed before but didn't find a wall space after the renovation was due to the fact that the renovation center prioritized using much of our wall space for built-in shelving that we would wrap our spaces around with books, so on the 1st and 2nd floor. So, but we try to display as much as we can.
If you can follow up to that, one of my questions, this is from my discussion with Maureen, she's out ill, and for those of you who don't know, Maureen is stepping down from the library board due to her illness and stuff. But I know one of the issues that she was concerned about was the de-accessioning the artwork that's in storage. And our policy just says we'll follow the financial guidelines. How do we do that, or who decides what pieces from our collection we're gonna get rid of?
Well, that's a question I think the board can provide more guidance on, and we can either follow the guidelines exactly that are outlined in the finance policy, which is basically they're up to a certain tier. It's up to my discretion on how to either sell or discard. Obviously, we wouldn't do that with art, you know, or just donate to another entity, or usually like another taxing body in the area. But if it's above a certain threshold, I would need to report it to the board and get approval, and so we can treat it like similar to that, or we could have a separate kind of parallel disposal policy that's just for the art collection, that if the board wants every piece of art that's not displayed if we're getting rid of it in some fashion, and the board wants to have a discussion for that, that's fine with me as well. So whatever the board would like to see is okay.
Is it the same threshold, Richard, about 25,000?
Let's see here. Let me pull that up off the top of my head. I need to refresh my memory. So,
While he's looking, Mary, anything you want to add from being on the committee?
Just that we put a lot of thought to the policy, and I think what we really wanted to do today was really come and have a fruitful discussion about some of the topics that Richard had outlined in his memo, in particular, basically the creation of like this new subcommittee, if a board member needs to be involved in kind of what we were talking about with de-accessing artwork. If we're bringing in new artwork, is it a decision that's done exclusively by library staff members that comprise like this committee? Do board members need to be involved? So I think that's part of the larger discussion. And then the second thing, I know we have a certain amount of money already allocated towards the art acquisition. I don't think we currently do any type of annual budgeting for it. It's just money is put into that. We just have the account. So I think that's another question for upcoming budgets. If it's something that we want to prioritize putting a small amount to every year to keep the art collection fresh, or if we just want to be doing it a little bit more ad hoc. So I think those are the two topics that would probably require the most discussion.
approval for acquisition, how to handle the accession art, and the budget thing can be discussed at a later point if the board would like. It is, so the finance policy, part of it says the board shall be informed prior to disposals of property having an estimated value of more than 25,000. So it's your
Agree.
And as of January, the current balance was 13,890.
For many years now, as long as I've been the director and even I think as the deputy director, I don't recall ever the board making a decision to put more money into that fund.
I thought we did have a discussion relative to EDI, saying spend that art acquisition, EDI artists.
I don't recall the specifics of that, but I will have to look back on it. And something we can resurrect in terms of, that that's a goal for us.
That was really something, Gene, that I was thinking about too, as part of the, the mission and the vision is having something, that spoke to, representing different cultures, different, artists, different time periods, different perspectives, as that relates back to, our library vision.
That was very much the impetus for wanting to do this, is to have an intentional collection that, well, just leave it at that, an intentional collection that does what we're trying to do as a library.
So you're saying there's several issues here that still need to be kind of fleshed out, so you're asking us to approve this policy tonight with more revisions to come, or?
Well,
is this
if
just a
the
preliminary?
board has a general consensus of how it wants to treat acquisition in terms of like decision making for acquisition, then if it's simple enough, then we can just approve as amended, and I can add a line or whatever to speak to what the board wants. If the board wants to have more conversation about that topic, as well as whether or not to have a separate disposal or de-accessioning policy, that's fine too. This could be tabled as well. I just wanted to present a draft as a starting point, and I wasn't sure like how quickly or easily the board would come to an agreement on the remaining points. So.
this committee that's been meeting, that's a permanent committee, or this is just?
No, and we didn't even call ourselves a committee. I think we just called ourselves a task force, kind of, just for this purpose alone. So it wasn't, to my understanding was it wasn't ever intended to be the subsequent committee that would decide, what we would purchase or anything like that. But it was that your understanding too?
Yeah, that was my understanding. I know when we were talking, we were just spitballing ideas about the DXS thing as well as possibly who would make up this committee. I think in general, at least for me, I think it's good to follow the general guidelines of how we treat our other assets in the library where staff is, responsible for selecting the best things. That being said as well, we have hundreds and thousands of books in the library and a much smaller collection of art, and that's going to be displayed in a larger way. So I don't think it's something that the board should necessarily drive, but maybe there's a board member who's just part of the committee just to provide an extra little bit of input from the community, but still the primary responsibility would reside with the staff. And I think we talked about having different people from the staff on the committee with different viewpoints and everything, to really help kind of write what you were talking about earlier, Michelle, looking at different perspectives and everything. And at least for me, de-accessing, there's, like you were asking before, Jean, about, 50% of the artwork is roughly probably in storage. I think as a group, we were thinking some of that we might want to de-access just in looking at it, especially now when you look at the survey and things like that. We have a lot of common themes where a lot of the artwork has a similar vibe, and it might behoove us to get something that looks a little bit different because adding diversity to the collection is a little more important too. So
Another thought with that is also we can identify the pieces that we're not displaying at any given time, and we can also loan art to other nonprofit orgs or taxing bodies if they're looking for something. We can kind of publicize that and just have a loan program if the board would like, that way. If the board doesn't want to let go of art in our permanent collection, but wants to not have art sitting in storage where it's not seen or experienced by anyone, then that's something that we can try.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Has the discussion come about in speaking similarly to loaning about us renting artwork from other bodies? If we're going to make deciding factors on what we're keeping and what's going to stay, or we've got 50% in storage, then why do we need them in storage? What are we hanging on to them for if we're not displaying them? Do we have emotional attachments to it that's why we're keeping it? You know what I'm saying? So I guess I don't understand the purpose of hanging on to them for a certain amount of time. And on the same note, if we really wanted to continue to, have thoughtful pieces and keep it current and keep it, fresh, of looking at the possibility of maybe finding, other places that rent out or, can loan us pieces in the interim, so that we don't have to hang on to them for so long. We don't need to actually acquire them. So that was kind of that one piece of it. The other piece I wanted to kind of address was as far as a group, because in the policy, it's pretty general, right? There isn't really a process in it, it's just a policy of it. So I don't know how specific we want to get within the policy to talk about that process, the actual step-by-step that we're going to do in order to acquire it, and who's on the committee, how many people are on it, and how many members from a certain group we want represented on there. So that's my question about the policy and how it's written. And then the other piece that spoke, as you were talking, Mary, about, we spend tens of thousands of dollars on books every single year, right? And these are, we enlist our staff to use their professionalism, their professional judgment, their backgrounds, all of their wisdom and experience to curate the books, right? And we look at professional, we're so well connected and so well versed. I myself as a board member, I don't think that I would want to oversee that process as a trustee. And I want to enlist that and empower our staff members and who are the experts in what we do here to oversee that process, right? I trust that they are going to be able to do that and really speak, I mean, look at all the wonderful things that are happening every single day here. So I really am of the mindset of trusting the staff to, curate the same way they do. They curate the books and the movies and and all of that sort of thing. This kind of falls within the lines of that. I think when we come back to the de-accessing, okay, the de-accessing of it, that would be something that we would then kind of have to oversee if it has that monetary value. Right?
And just to address, I'll try to address some of your questions.
Sorry, I know it was like a lot.
No, I think I remember them. But just, I'm not gonna go in order, but in terms of approval, I appreciate what you're saying about kind of entrusting the staff with that. However, I do think that if it's over the $25,000 threshold that I have, then it should come to the board. Just like anything does, but it's more of a budget driving reason why that would happen, as opposed to like kind of, do you like this order or not? And then in terms of
Richard, just one
sure.
addendum to that.
Sure.
People who are experts in property that is art, something may be valued at $20,000 right now, but an art expert might say, well, that artist has this historical significance, that might be worth holding on to because that actually could be valuable potentially in the future. So I would just add that question, is that something that we should
as part of the process
also be mindful of as part of the process? Yeah, do we get expert opinions, one or two expert opinions which we've already done, right? We already have valuations of the existing art collection. And so before we de-access any of the art, what's the process? That's the question I have. What would be the process and procedure? Who do we consult that actually is an expert in the art industry and the art field?
So great thoughts there. When I was talking about kind of getting approval, I specifically meant for acquisition of art, in which case we would have a selling price, right? You're absolutely right. The artwork, and that kind of was my point about that I was going to get to about your first question, why hang on to the art.
Right.
They are assets, they have monetary value. So to Mira's point, we have an appraisal. If we ever wanted to let go of a piece of art, I think it would be smart to have a fresh appraisal of it, of course, and make sure, that we have the most current information about the value of a piece or the appraised value of a piece. So I totally agree with that. In terms of why else we might not want to let go, like I said, they are assets, but there are other ways to display the art that's not necessarily like year-long permanent up on the walls. Like we could have a certain month in the year where we bring out the things from storage, and kind of and display them in our MR gallery if that seems to make sense. In terms of renting art, I don't recall us really diving into that, but others can remind me.
I mean, the closest we got was differentiating between what we mean by the permanent art collection and the goals there versus the exhibits, which it offers some like parallel opportunities, right? And also thinking about what our process is, where that's a committee of 4 people who bring museum experience, art experience, programming connection, and I'm really good at scheduling meetings, so I also have experience in these areas, but.
I was gonna say the same thing, actually, like the curated exhibits that we have throughout the year in the gallery bring that element of like kind of fresh artwork in the library. That's a separate thing that we know is going to continue. So this particular discussion was driven by what do we want in our permanent collection, with the idea that we might really feature it in the building, not just for like a short period of time.
On a permanent basis.
I believe if
On a more permanent basis?
yes, yeah. I believe your last question was related to like kind of how much do we want to get into like the process and procedures and and that's only up to the board, obviously, you know, the board approves policy, but I would just say, in general, when we prepare policies, we try to write the policies in a way that they're not process and procedure heavy, because those can change given a number of different circumstances, and we don't want to keep bringing something back to the board because we're not following the procedure that's kind of like iterative, you know, or like kind of can change. So that's why the policies are more things that are more prone to like stay the same over, let's say, a year at least, you know. But that's not to say that we wouldn't have documented kind of set procedures that we really are thoughtful about.
And then correct me if I'm wrong, I know when we were meeting, we were talking about what about like, you know, special programming with the art, like we were talking about all these things, and then we kind of had to reel ourselves in and say, let's just start first at the very basic, to your point, Richard, about the acquisition and the deaccessing, starting there, and then kind of having, not a loose policy, but this like very basic skeleton or framework for what we wanted to do, and then once getting approval on this, then we would start talking about more of the details, right? Like forming the committee, figuring out what do we have, you know, looking at the artwork and what we currently have, and that's what we were thinking the next steps would be. I think what this policy does is it highlights the really important things like the financial aspects, obviously protection of free speech as well. That was the thing that we really talked about a lot, especially, you know, with making sure that we have policy put in place here for people, and, you know, suggestions, or if they do or do not like something, what the procedure is for that gift. So I think this, you know, as in terms of a framework, I think it does what a lot of our other policies do, which is establish this is what it is, so we have something a little bit more concrete than what we had before, but without getting too much into the weeds, because that would be the next step.
Right.
Richard, can you help
Yes.
me understand
Sure.
the process of the art appraisal? Like, who do we have that does it? Are they internal, external? How often is it done? Is it on a as-need basis, or like, you know, like right now the renovation's gonna happen, everything's coming out of storage, so is that a good time to get it appraised, or if we're looking to sell it or get rid of it, or, you know, then is that when we call in the appraisal? Like, how does this work? When was the last time we had the appraisal?
The last time I believe was in 2018, I want to say. 2018, May 2018. So it was a local art appraiser, an expert. Well, it's definitely not internally driven. We get an expert to come in, actually physically look at the pieces in our collection. We provided as much information about the artist and there's a fancy word for this, but I can't remember the origin of how we received the art or acquired the art.
Provenance.
Yes, exactly. That's the fancy word that it was. My art history classes in college, I was like, what's that word? You know. But and then that art appraiser created a whole report basically with each art piece numbered, a little thumbnail image of it, so we know what they're talking about, what the condition was when they reviewed it, and the dimensions.
We
And
have
that's
the
in
documented
materials.
here.
Susie has posted that, so you could.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and so.
It actually has photographs of
Yeah.
all the pieces, which is really interesting.
So they do that, and then they, as far as how often we do it, when I became the director, I didn't see that we had an art appraisal, so we hired someone to do an art appraisal. Blythe, do you recall if the auditors or anyone ever has asked you or told you, like, this is the proper frequency for how often you should have an art appraisal?
They haven't.
Okay.
I know, I can ask always what they think we should do, because they know they had us, it was in the, you know, the last audit, that they wanted us to get an appraisal for everything else. But I can ask.
In my mind, like, we haven't done another art appraisal since 2018 because there was really no need for that information to be refreshed. But again, to your point, when you just asked about like when we potentially let go of a piece of art, would we want to appraise? And I definitely agree with that. You know, I think that's a proper time to at least get that one piece appraised. You might not need the appraisal of the entire collection again, but.
Can you remind everybody what's the total value of the collection?
At that time, it was $404,670.
Right, so it's a significant collection. We had some very nice patrons donating art to this institution.
Yeah.
So how many came from, you know, like acquiring it versus, you know, donations through maybe someone's, like someone passed away and then wanted to donate it to the library?
I don't know the specific percentages, but I'm just scrolling through this. There are, most of them say donated by a certain family or
All of them.
individual. Sorry?
I'm pretty sure all of them are all through donations.
Some are, at least one says commissioned by the library, you know, so.
Oh, that, yes.
Yeah, there might not.
Piece was commissioned, surprisingly. You can't see it at the end of the
That's
slide.
Jean's favorite one.
That's a Harms.
The house.
That's right, yeah.
I was surprised to see we actually paid.
That was commissioned in 2000. I think that's.
It's a historical building, right, in
Yes,
Skokie?
that's right next to it.
The Harms Historical, that was commissioned by the trustees in 2002.
For how much?
The retail replacement value, I don't know how much the original commission was, but the retail replacement value is $26,000 at the time of 2018.
Richard, while we're talking about the financial aspects of this, so I'm sure that the insurance company, in order to insure such a collection, has, or I would hope there's some kind of parameters of how this should be stored. There should be climate control, there should be security, there should be all of these different, you know, procedural things in place. So I'm just curious, we've never talked about it before, so
I think
who administers
there's room
all of
for
that to
improvement.
make sure we're
I don't want to make light of it. I'm sincere.
I mean,
in all seriousness.
$404,000
Yeah.
is a substantial collection, so
Yeah.
what are we doing to make sure that it's insurable ongoingly and?
Yeah, no, I don't mean to make light of it, really. I think we need to improve in that area. After the renovation, like I said, well, everything was up, and then everything went into temporary storage, and then when we renovated or completed the renovation, a lot of it came back. But so much was, and we were just coming back from COVID and all, et cetera. I'm not trying to make excuses, but that wasn't the highest priority to find, you know, the best ways to store all of our art. So I think
Since we're
that-
talking about it now, I just would add that to the list of items.
But maybe that's something to think about also, you know, when we're talking budget, you know, where is that money gonna, where are we gonna allot that? Does that go into the art budget? Does that go into just kind of general?
Yeah.
Amy, you're gonna say?
Well, I will say that the same person who's a Skokie resident, he works at the Field Museum, who installs our temporary exhibits. He like advised on how things are wrapped and stored. So it's not just us making our best call. As is, yeah.
And that is something we talked about, this committee taking on, is if we're going to be doing this, we really need to make sure all of that stuff is taken care of properly.
And again, because I would imagine insurance companies would want to, you know, if something ever were to happen, heaven forbid, to the building and therefore to all the contents, you know, I would imagine we'd have to prove up something, right? So I think as a part of our discussion now, that is something I'd like to see us delve further into. You know, what would be the requirements? Again, climate control, security, proper wrapping, you know, storage, all of those issues. Sure, there's many more that.
Right, well, if we end up renting, I mean, I think renting, you mentioned, is not off the table. Some of the logistics of how loaning, sharing, like art, like does that change some of those insurance kind of questions? Those are all things I think we need to answer. I don't feel like we're moving into it too fast. I feel like you're gonna be very careful about all of
I
that.
think you're exactly right. I mean, when the Art Institute has a exhibition, right, they're borrowing from, you
Right.
better believe there's all kinds of steps that they're taking.
Yeah.
You know, but I'm just saying those
Right.
principles are the same, I think, if we're borrowing or loaning from another library institution or other community
We
institution.
would want to treat it respectfully and also
Yeah,
because it has value as well, monetary value.
yeah.
So we want to be responsible. What I'm hearing, and Jean, let me know if you want to go in a different way, but it seems like there's some general consensus, I guess, about, or at least it was suggested, that the acquisition of art be similar in way to like what we normally do for everything else, and that if it's over a certain threshold, I would bring it to the board, but otherwise, we would possibly form my thought is to form a small committee, and I like your idea of having maybe a board member, perhaps you'd be interested, of having more of an advisory role as part of that committee. Not to say that board member would make all the decisions for that committee.
No, absolutely not, and that's what I wanted to be very clear
Yeah,
on. Like, one of-
participant as an advisor.
Yeah,
And
just to
then,
kind of bring that point of view of like, we are interacting with the public a lot too, and once again, we talked about before, I 100% agree with Michelle, it's that division of what's appropriate for the board and, what the library staff does an awesome job. I just truly see the board person being on there, especially with how expensive some of these things are, just being on there as an advisor or asking questions.
I like
And
that idea.
that's really just the limit, I think, of what the board that is there for.
And
Not
then
what they're doing now,
in terms of letting go of art, it sounds like maybe we can flesh out that part of the policy a little bit. I like the idea of possibly inserting some language about having an appraisal done on that art, any art that's potentially kind of released from our collection. But otherwise, it sounds like maybe we could follow some of the similar guidelines, like if it's over $25,000, then I would need to inform the board first. And then it also sounds like maybe we need a little bit of language added to the policy about like our intent to handle art in a way that is safe and respectful, and also just safeguarding our investment in the value of the art. So.
Richard, with the insurance and the appraisals and all that, would that come out of the acquisitions fund?
Well, no, I personally see the acquisitions fund as strictly art acquisitions, like the purchase of art.
Okay.
The other things like the appraisal, that would be kind of like a business expense, the way I see it, so.
Okay.
But if the board wants to handle it differently, I mean, we can budget, define the budgeting differently. But I think that those smaller costs can come out of just our normal operating expenses.
Okay.
So, and it's cleaner that way, where we know everything that's coming out of that one fund is only for the price of like acquisitions. So, I don't know
Yeah,
if
I
that
think those
sounds.
suggestions make sense, but what I might suggest though is that we, in minutes, table this.
For further
For further
discussion to a
discussion.
future meeting.
Let's see the draft about the committee and everything you said, I agree with it, but I think it's a big enough project, it's a big enough amendment that
Oh,
let's
that's
table it and
yeah.
have it come back.
No, I was suggesting that would bring it back, not today, because there's enough.
Yeah, not just
It's not
as
a simple
amended,
line,
it's,
yeah.
it's still needs to be fleshed out.
And Richard, to your point earlier, we've had many priorities. And so now, it's a good time for this discussion, and it's a good time to further, distill what all the relevant points are of this topic. So I think this is a really good beginning for the board to delve into this.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that everybody here knows it's a real collection,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's my minimalist self, that's like, why do we hold on to this? That makes a lot of sense.
Very kind
Right,
of
easy,
like
My fear is like if someone gave, grandma's piece that she wanted to give to the library, and if we get rid of it, like, person comes in and says, well, what happened to grandma's piece?
Putting on my lawyer hat, do we know that we have clear title to deaccessionize everything? Some people can give it as a
Yeah.
gift with the caveat of
That's another point. Who's on the committee, who's taking notes of all these times?
Susie.
Yeah, I mean, Jessica too, Jessica Goodman is pretty good with the details about those kinds
That's a
of.
good point, Jean.
When they donated, were there conditions if you were getting rid of?
We can research all that, yeah, some of it might not have any, documentation.
Right, no, I understand, but some might, some of the least more valuable.
And then-
Family piece.
And then anything that's kind of, where that's not explicitly stated or agreed upon by the library, our finance policy does state that, basically, in a nutshell, we're allowed to do whatever we want with anything that's given to the library, even donations.
Okay. So that's all the financial and pragmatic stuff, and then just on another note of it, I think art and music are just perfect companions for a library setting. It just came from Door County, where we went to the Door County Library and Miller Art Museum. Yes, they're both in one building, and the artist, Mr. Miller, actually donated funds to make that library, and he's an amazing artist. So to see people coming for the special exhibitions there while we were there, we went there specifically for that, and we were there when other people were there to see exhibitions. And it's just a perfect marriage, right? Because we're here, right, to educate people, to uplift people. We already do so much cultural programming, so it's wonderful to have our art collection. It's wonderful that we have our rotating exhibition. Kudos to who do you do that? Do you find the artists? Because they're wonderful. They're wonderful.
Yeah,
I'm looking
and they're all,
forward to
and they're all
seeing them.
local.
And they submit,
Yeah.
people.
Predominantly, it's community members or local artists who submit a proposal to exhibit, and prioritizing across the committee, looking at, representing both of, like, wide spectrum of types of art, but also, different, perspectives of artists and, a diverse representation of artists
Yeah,
given our community, so.
it's absolutely wonderful. Did everybody see the exhibition with the high school students?
Yeah.
How amazing are these people? How talented are these young artists in our community, right? I mean, just to call out one of our wonderful exhibitions,
It's
so
an
kudos.
annual.
Yeah,
Really
that's
great.
the annual one. And you'll always see our exhibits located in the cultural and performances part of your monthly event highlight.
So I mentioned that to say, as we're looking at our collection, and people have mentioned it already, how do we continue to educate our community that this is here, that this is another wonderful service that we provide? You can go to galleries, but we have a gallery here at the library. Let's stop in and see the ever-changing possibilities in that gallery, right? It's
Yeah.
marvelous. Yeah, well done. Thank you.
Ella, was there anything you wanted to add? We didn't give you a chance to jump in.
I don't know if she heard you.
Ella, was there any, did you have a question or comment on any of this? Okay.
No, I
All
don't.
right, we're in agreement, we'll table this.
Further discussion.
Good discussion.
Thank
We have
you.
a consensus of direction to go.
Absolutely, it's very clear. We'll prepare something, a revision next month.
Or whatever, there's not a rush, I mean, whatever.
Okay.
All right,
Thank you. Thank you.
Right?
thanks folks for coming.
Welcome, PowerPoint. Great.
Thank you.
And moving on to page 45, approval of revised board remote participation policy. So Illinois passed a new law allowing another exception for why a board member can participate remotely in the meeting, and added the addition of unexpected childcare obligation as a reason to be at home when called into the meeting and still be able to vote. But the law said that it's allowed if it's adopted by the board, so hence this policy is here for us to adopt. So it's now legal, but we have to officially adopt it for it to be incorporated. Thoughts or discussions? If not, can I have a motion to approve the revised board remote participation policy?
So moved.
Was it the only addition to it? Okay, that's literally just.
Just that phrase, and just because it was signed by the governor. So we have a motion to approve, we have a second?
Second, that is good.
All right, we all have to vote. Michelle,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes.
Ella,
Yes.
Mira,
Yes.
Shabna,
Yes.
and me as well, so that passes 6-0.
Thank you.
Yep, that was easy. And then we now have anticipated capital projects. We don't need to vote on this, right?
No, this is just for information purposes. If the board has any questions about what I shared here, happy to go into it a little bit more, but I think it's pretty straightforward in terms of some of the projects that are known or possible for this current fiscal year, and then also, obviously, the next year as well, so.
This is very helpful, Richard. We've already talked about many of
Yes,
these items,
right.
and it's just nice to see it,
In
you
one.
know? Yeah, it's nice to see it in one place, and it's great that we see it on a regular sort of schedule, right? So we can anticipate and plan for it.
Yeah, I'm glad that it's helpful. It's helpful for us internally as well, actually, the exercise of going through this, so.
I just had a question, and I had asked Richard about it, just about like flood protection and control in the library. I was affected by floods, like maybe 2 years ago, and it was really unpleasant, but it was an incredibly eye-opening experience about how much damage water can do. And I know you said that we have a sump pump and we have sensors. I just really want to make sure that those are being inspected regularly, and that's, I mean, it's terrifying to me, especially with just climate change and seeing, I feel like these 100-year events are happening more and more frequently, so I just want to make sure that we're taking all the necessary precautions with regards to flood protection, because I never see it on anything that we talk about, or, so just kind of throwing it out there.
It's not a glamorous topic, about the building, but it's definitely, as I mentioned to you, we do have the sensors, they're like little hockey pucks almost, where if water touches them, it instantaneously sends out an alert to not only me and our building manager, but also to our insurance company, because they don't want it to happen, right? So it's a protective measure for that. We've had them for a few years now, maybe 2 or 3 years. It was actually initiated by, the program in which we got them was initiated by Lyra, our insurance pool, so a lot of libraries now have them. Also, I mentioned the sump pump, but also the fact that our basement has 2 levels, and there's a sub-basement level, like so even if that accumulates water, the rest of the basement is like a tier above it, and then there's a first floor. So we're kind of in good position as far as that's the structure of the building.
Okay.
And we've never, knock on wood, we haven't had any serious incidents. We've had some like low level water, but and then I think it was my first couple months maybe as a director, we had the sump pump fail and we had to have an emergency approval of replacing it. Maybe it was in my first year. I think Gene was still on the board at that point. So our sump pump is inspected, the
To Mary's point though, do we do regular testing of that whole system?
Oh, yeah, we have regular inspections of everything basically in the building and those kind of systems,
Right.
but our insurance company has an interest obviously in not having this kind of thing happen to us, so they have sent someone out every year to do like a walk around and inspection. There's a report on what they recommend we adjust in our building for safety.
Does some pump have a backup if the power goes out?
Exactly, do we have a backup? That's what I was thinking,
No,
of a backup
because
generator?
I'm telling, this was probably, it was beyond terrifying. I mean, like, it went from like 2 inches to 18 inches within the course of 30 minutes in our house. I'm saying it happens like really fast. And after that happened, it's a house where we have 2 sump pumps, and then one actually has a backup for if power goes out. So I just want to make sure that ours also has some type of backup.
I don't know off the top of my head. I probably did know at some point, but it wasn't information that I keep at the front of my brain there. So we'll do some research and check on it.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that that's included. I mean, I'm not saying let's do work. I just want to make sure that when we think about, and I mean, that will affect the entire library if it's foundational or whatnot. So I just want to make sure that that's being looked at and that we're proactively engaging on that particular topic.
Yeah, of course, yeah. We can definitely look into that. I'll work with our building contractor, maybe our plumbers, to figure out how to assess that.
Okay, cool.
It's a great point, though. Mary, the points you're making are so important and relevant to the times we're living in. Where we live, you know, water even can come in if you don't have tuck pointing that's been updated. Water can seep in and come into your walls and create mold issues like anything, you know, so you have to be really, diligent with this
Yeah,
stuff.
and there's always gonna be the element of something that we didn't think of, but these are good reminders of some things that we can be proactive in, so appreciate it.
And I would even recommend just engaging with the village. I mean, full disclosure, I'm also on the Skokie Stormwater Task Force as well. So like these are things that we as a community are talking about how to improve stormwater, mitigation within the community. So I would just recommend, reaching out to the village, and obviously, I know you do all the time, but, just maybe ask for updates on where they're at with those types of projects and staying engaged with that, which might be worth
That's a
doing.
good point, yeah, we can do that.
All right, any other discussion? Otherwise, we'll move on to discussion about the tax levy. And again, with tax levy, we're not voting on this tonight. This is, have discussion, give you some idea of where we're at.
So, I don't think you want me to read my memo to you, it's quite lengthy, there are a lot of figures, there's a lot of context here. Just to paint the broad picture of what I tried to share with the board, there's the context of kind of our recent years, 6-7 years of history of our tax levy increases or balances of the GOF. But what I really wanted to share that I thought might be useful is more of the projected revenues and expenditures. And again, I'm not going to dig into the specific numbers unless the board would like me to, but in a nutshell, if we project our current, our next year's revenue at a certain amount and our current next year's expenditures at a certain amount, we project that if we spend our entire budget, we will have a slight shortfall of $177,000 approximately. So the board has not, as you know, approved a tax increase in the past 5 years. So we're still, the total amount of the tax levy is still what was determined with the 2017 tax levy. So that was prior to COVID and the renovation and all that. So I tried to share here, and I want to credit Blythe for obviously a lot of help with this, but we tried to show what the amount of a 0 through 5% increase would yield in terms of what that dollar amount, in terms of how much it would add to our total levy, and then the cost average increase per household. And then this is a table on the last sheet I'm referring to, and then what our projected revenue over expenditures would end up being if we adopted one of those, if the board adopted one of those options, the variety of options. So you can see here, according to our projections, that it's where you get between the 1% to 2% where we start crossing over into where we want to be, which is more revenue than expenditures, right? We don't want to kind of spend more than what we receive for the year. So there's so many facets to this discussion. I'm happy to dive into any aspect of it if the board would like, but I can also take questions in between meetings, but I would like the board to, as traditionally done, approve a tax levy, whatever the percentile is next month, so that we can provide that information to the Village of Skokie, and they can attach it to their total levy that they're going to take to the community in December.
Lots of discussion. I'll play devil's advocate here. We've been doing 0% increase, and the shortfall is premised on if we spend the entire budget, but in fact, for the last 5 years, we've had $1 million unspent from our budget that we're able to move into reserves since 2019 over $1 million. So with us being able to move $1 million a year, I can't see asking taxpayers to pay more when we've got $1 million extra that we're putting in reserve. And we've done well with it. That's how we're funding the third floor, based on the $3 million we moved from the last 3 years. But I feel like as long as we're still showing $1 million surplus in terms of what we've actually been spending, I can't justify being in favor of a tax increase for next year. But that's just me.
When we look at the budgeting and at the end, I mean, is it really, are there areas where that we end up not spending, you know, like Jean's kind of talking about, that we're not spending, that maybe we needed to just reflect back on how we're budgeting it?
Yeah, so I think Jean's point and your question are both valid and good for our discussion. Blythe and I have talked a lot about this. I'll try to sum it up and Blythe jump in if you want to add anything, but we have, over the past 5 years of not increasing our tax levy, we have certainly tightened our budget, right? And so, which is a good thing. The budget that I inherited, you know, and the board inherited from prior to my role as a director, it was designed, the spending and the budget amount was in part designed, from my understanding, to at that time get the reserves into a healthier place. Okay, and so that was what we kind of were doing early on. Since the tax levy wasn't increased over the past 5 years, we had definitely tightened things. So. And that you could, even going back to my previous memos every year around this time, you can see the capital and also the budget memos. The capital line has basically shrunk to almost nothing. You know, like next year we're projecting $0 in our capital operating line. Doesn't mean that we can't do capital projects, but that would mean that we would have to take it out of the reserve fund, which, as you know, we're going to be in a place where it's at the minimum of what the board would like to see. So we wouldn't be really projected to grow the reserve fund, and which might be fine, you know, for this point in time. But we're definitely tightening our belts here, you know, with in terms of spending. And so the recent revenue over expenditures that we've experienced, and the amount that the board have recently approved to transfer over from the GOF into the reserves, some of that was in part due to the reduced spending during the years affected by COVID, especially 2020, 2021, in the primary years that we weren't doing as many physical in-person programs. You know, we weren't. At some point, you know, when we were closed for 3 months, you know, the collections there wasn't as much coming out, even, you know, and after that closure as well, you know. So a lot of our operations and services were affected to the point where we were not having to spend as much. Also, at that time, the board instructed me to work off of a 10% reduced budget from what it approved prior to our awareness of COVID starting, right? So which I'm not saying any of that was wrong. I actually think those were all good decisions, but I guess what I'm saying is moving forward and projecting forward, I'm not 100% certain that the amount that we've been left over with every year will be there. Even after this current fiscal year, I'm very interested to see where we end up. And next fiscal year, like the trend is like decreasing in terms of the revenue over expenditures from our projections. So, yeah, go ahead, Blake.
I also want to say that in the last 2 years, yes, we might have transferred $1 million, but it wasn't because we spent that much less. It's because of the personal property replacement tax. there was an additional 800,000 in one year, and unfortunately, I'm not connected to the internet because I wanted to pull that spreadsheet up. But Richard had me do an analysis of, yes, we were over 1.2 million, but why? Was it expenditures or was it revenue? In the last couple of years, it's because of revenue from the personal property replacement tax. I did get the estimate for fiscal year 24, for the current fiscal year. I got it this past week, and there's a 30% reduction in the PPRT for this year. Now, we only budgeted 400,000, so the 850 that comes in will be okay. But a lot of it, I just want to say, is because of that additional revenue.
We always are conservative in our projections of how much money will come in. So with the PPRT, which is a corporate replacement tax, like the business entities, and it's a long explanation, but I think I've explained that before, so I won't do that now. But the PPRT, that has been a very unusually high revenue stream for us.
Our
Last year,
history was usually
the year before.
300 to 400,000, which is why for so many years we continued to budget at that lower level, because these past 2 years were an anomaly.
Why was it why were they so much higher the last 2 years?
It all has to deal with the corporate income tax and the way that the Illinois government goes with the local government distribution tax, which is what villages used to get 10% of the Illinois tax, and what they do with the PPRT, and they go back and forth, and they recently did a re-look at it all, and that's why it's a 30% reduction this year because of that. It's all what the state does with their tax laws, with their Illinois corporate tax laws, because it's corporate taxes.
So in other words, we don't have confidence to project, let's say, 1.2 million or the amount that we got last year. You know what I mean? So that's part of this. It's very well possible that the board, if it increases a tax that we have an unexpected, again, very high amount coming in for that particular revenue stream. And we might end up with revenue over expenditures, in which case the board may want to move some of that over to the reserve fund. But it's getting to the point where we can't, still don't feel comfortable budgeting the projected revenues on that level. And we're having rising costs with health insurance. Obviously, salaries always go up. Just the cost of everything is kind of increasing. So it's just getting to the point where it's getting a little bit more and more uncomfortable, So I'm not saying that the 0% is out of the question in terms of operations, and we will, like I've always said, we will always make it work. But if we do a 0% increase, what will likely happen, just because we are conservative in the way we approach budgeting, is when it comes time to do the budget, we will probably likely make some cuts in certain areas of our budget to not over-anticipate or over-project what we might have to spend. Does that make sense? Okay.
So the board members want to weigh in on what they're thinking?
I'm always thinking it's kind of looking at everything. Like when I see this jump from 1% to 2%, you're going from a project, when you look at the projected revenue over expenditures, you're going from a minus 42,000 to up nearly $100,000, right? So my question back to Richard was kind of like what you were asking. I wasn't necessarily saying I don't want to, increase the tax levy, but maybe it's a combination of looking at the budget and seeing if we can reduce expenditures in some way, but also just have a small tax levy. I don't know about as high as 2%, but I was wondering if maybe looking at smaller increments, 1 to 1.25%, just to see where the numbers come out. Because when I look at the average increase per household, 1% is $5.60 per household. So to me, especially with everything that the library is giving back to the community, with the increased costs, I mean, every year it just seems like things are just astronomically higher and higher. I just don't want us to end up in a negative fiscal situation where we aren't anticipating for it. But I'm staunchly against, to your point, Jean, like going overboard and taxing people unnecessarily for money that we're gonna end up with a lot of excess. So I think what I'm looking for here is to try to strike that balance of getting as close to the projected revenue over expenditures being as close to zero as possible. So that's kind of the solution that I'm looking for. So whether it's completely adjusting the budget to account for that, so we don't have to raise the taxes, or doing a very small tax levy with also looking at the budget. I don't know if I'm in full favor of giving a tax levy without looking at the budget at all, if that makes sense. I think there's a solution in the middle to
And just to
that.
be clear, we have looked at the projected budget and we factored in certain decreases and increases to the best of our knowledge, you know, so
Yeah.
we do take a close look at the budget. It's just that we don't ask the board to approve the budget until
Right.
the spring, so we can't wait obviously until then. We have to have an approval of the tax levy around this time of year, so. But we do take a look at it, and I did mention that there are certain lines where we will decrease it, like the physical content, we can do a little bit there. Professional services may see a slight decrease. But overall, you know, expenses are rising, and this also accounts for a total decrease in our capital operating line. So I try to make that clear that our projections are embedded in that is zeroing out that budget line that basically traditionally has been used to pay for significant capital improvements without dipping into our reserve. So, or building projects and that kind of thing.
So if we look back then to the possible capital projects, right, for
Yes.
20, so if we scroll back, right, to page 49, and we're looking at the amount of, you know, what are possible things that we might need in our capital, right, for capital projects, would be all of these things.
Right, and that's why you can see there in the column, estimated cost from reserves, because we're not counting on having money in the operating line to do any of this, so. Which is, I'm not trying to sway the board, I promise, but it's to just give you a picture of what the reality will be. You know, we will be spending from the reserves for these projects if we don't have any money dedicated to capital improvements in our general operating budget.
Could you remind us too, what's the current amount of our bond debt, the total amount?
I would have to look that up. I don't know. We're 3 or 4 years into it. I have a beautiful schedule upstairs, but I will get that for you
It was probably like 12 million, or 13 million dollars of debt.
and send it out to you.
And our
It's about
current,
1.1 million a year
Right.
Times how many years do we have left? What did we say?
We didn't start the first year. I don't like to talk.
Wise is very careful about not
Yeah,
saying numbers unless.
I know, because.
Which is good quality in finance.
I just don't want to throw a number out there. I will make sure
Absolutely.
Richard gets it to you. I will.
But I have a feeling it's somewhere in the ballpark of 12, 13, 14. It's
There's certainly
$1 million.
debt left.
That's how
Yes,
much
there is.
Yeah,
this library
but
owes.
that's folded into the existing total tax levy already. That's not like an additional amount that's not accounted for.
No, that's right. I just want to make sure newer board members are aware of that.
Sure.
Yeah, because that's important, I think, to have the full picture of what we're asking our community, right, to participate in. So,
Something that would be helpful for me, at least in making a decision, would be kind of looking at what areas you were thinking about trimming down as far as the budget goes. So maybe looking at what our budget was for this year, what our spending was from last year, like as we closed out last year's budget, and then kind of what you were thinking about the numbers anticipated
Okay,
for next year. I think that would maybe give me a better
we can give
financial
you,
picture.
we can do that. We can give you our best kind of preliminary look at what a budget might look like, as long as you don't hold me to that completely by in April.
You can put draft on the
Yes,
top.
okay. Just for tax levy discussion.
Yes.
Exactly. We can certainly provide that to the board. I can try to actually send that out well in advance of the next meeting in case there is kind of more information.
I think that would be helpful, because like, let's say there's a cut that we feel strongly that, like, no, we think the community actually needs this, we don't wanna cut, I think that makes a decision to do a small tax levy a little bit easier, but if it seems feasible, I think that's a great idea.
And then you were talking a little bit about between the differences, between the 1% and 2%, so
Yes.
maybe some calculations on that.
We have that here just in case we needed to go into that, but we'll put it all into the materials for the next,
Package, yeah,
meeting, yeah, for sure.
thank you.
And we'll rerun the numbers and everything, and if there's any other adjustments that we think could be made, we can update the numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Sheldon, what do you think?
I'm echoing everything you all said. I mean, I feel at some point, we can't go on with the zero. We're gonna have to see what that increase is though. So I'm looking forward to getting that information from you so I can feel a little bit more, comfortable making that decision.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Mary summarized many of the points that are in my mind. And I like what you asked also, Michelle, about give us maybe some further breakdowns so we can see, what you all are thinking. It's true, I want to acknowledge we obviously are living in an inflationary cycle ongoing, although the Fed is doing their best, right, to curtail that. So obviously, yes, all kinds of services and products are increasing in cost. That's also happening for our community members, right? Taxes are being increased on them all over the place, right? And costs are being increased on them. So I've always been of the mind that if there's any way that we can do it, I would prefer not to increase the tax levy. With that being understood that we are living in an inflationary time, the idea of a 1% increase, that is something that I would consider. I would like to see some more of the data, as Michelle asked for. But I'm also of the mind that I would not prefer to see 2% increase.
We can give a range of like between 1 to 2 as well, and like kind of in quarterly increments, and
Right.
more precise with the numbers.
Yeah, we've done that in prior years, looking at 1.25, as you said, Mary, 1.5 maybe.
Is there
Maybe just 1.25.
the thing I said about the capital operating line is actually honestly one of my biggest concerns, because we are kind of, like I said, zeroing that out in our projections. If we put that back in, the shortfall would be that much greater, right? So it would help me if the board would give me an indication. I mean, it doesn't have to be now, but we can present options. But one of the key questions for me is the board okay with that 0%, on the capital operating line, which would mean that we would be spending out of the reserve fund, which would mean that we would be decreasing that. Now, the reserve fund gains interest, right? So maybe somewhat of it will be evened out, and perhaps this current fiscal year, we may have an excess where we can transfer over some, which would kind of take care of some of that expenditure for next year. But again, these are all maybes, right? So it's hard to guarantee anything right now. So that's my one kind of, I guess, biggest concern here. I think we can make some changes and we'll show it to you like you suggested. But that capital line, zeroing out, we've never really done that here. We've always had a comfortable amount there to kind of hold our reserves and increase it. So
I'd like to know how much money will be in the reserve after the third floor renovation costs.
If my memory serves me correctly, it was right around the 5 million from our last month's discussion. So we'll be right at that threshold.
After all of the third
Yes,
floor
yes.
renovation has been paid for?
And the chiller.
And the
project.
chiller.
And the chiller
Those two get us
both?
down to the minimum we want to stay at.
Right,
Out to our,
right. The other factor is, we want to maintain the GOF being at a certain level based on the board's guidance and direction, and also the advice of the municipal finance advisor that we work with sometimes. So right now, when our projection of that, as you recall from last month's discussion, we are going to be slightly under the 40% that is our normal target. Hopefully at the end of next fiscal year, we'll have a little bit of excess of revenue over expenditures. We can still make maybe a transfer over to the reserves, but also leave some in the operating GOF to kind of get that level up higher for the following year, 2025. So it's all kind of like tiered levels of looking forward. It's not just this year or next year. It's also like the following year. So.
And then I was wondering, as far as like best practices for budgeting, is it typically best practice to have a capital line with zero and then pulling from a reserve? Or is it to really have your capital projects already budgeted for and your reserves really as a reserve?
So
You know what I'm saying?
I don't know about best practice, but honestly, from what I've heard from other libraries, it's done differently by every library, So our board, and the board can change this directive to me, of course, but the board has always said that they want the 5 months worth of operating in reserves as a kind of an absolute emergency, but also do that 40% level targeted for the GOF balance. And that's actually really smart in my opinion, because we have hopefully it never happens, but like a disaster, like Mary was talking about, a flood or a situation or whatever. Of course, we have insurance, but also there will be expenses, that, like the chiller replacement, that was something, it's a big ticket item, and it's nice to have a reserve fund that can absorb that, but also not be totally zeroed out, right? And it's nice to have a GOF parallel to that, where it's sufficient enough so that not if, but when the county delays tax collections and distributions like it did last year and like it will this year, we don't have to go asking for money to anyone. We have a GOF that can absorb that and survive that until we get that next tax distribution collection, if that makes sense. So it's nice to have Blythe used the term once, belts and suspenders. So it's nice to have both. And in my opinion, that's part of like the community's confidence in the library, that it's run with that type of conservative like fiscal management. So I feel like I guess like I said, I'm getting to the point where it's a little bit more and more uncomfortable. It's not to say I'm comfortable to the point where we don't have the money to do the things that we need to do in terms of services, but it's getting uncomfortable in terms of not adhering to the board's kind of expectations of where we want the GOF and the reserve fund, if that makes sense. So at some point it's gonna give, so I don't know if it's this year or next year or the following year, but it's gonna get tighter and tighter and tighter. So.
But again, is there some way that we can look at the expense side of this? Can we do more expense control? Is that possible?
It's always possible. It's up to the board to determine if it wants to cut services, or collection sizes, or collection dollars, or program, or continuing ed, or obviously salaries is another item, like that's the board's responsibility, obviously, and authority, to make those decisions ultimately.
Ella, can I ask you to weigh in on your thoughts on the tax?
My only thoughts are, if we don't increase the levy this year, will we be kicking the can down the road and then have to go back to the community and ask for a larger levy next year? It's just something I'm thinking about. So if we say 0% increase, and then next year we find ourselves in a situation where we have to ask for a levy, and it's a 3-4% levy, I think that may hit folks a little harder than if we kind of do a little this year, a little next year. I don't see prices or inflation going down anytime soon, but I'm not an economist. So I will say that, and those are my thoughts on it. So just a little concerned about, will we be kicking the can down the road?
Thank you. So you have enough information?
Yes, I think I have a lot of good information. If the board has any thoughts or questions or requests for information in between meetings, please just let me know or let Gina know, and Gina and I talk all the time so we can prepare what you need for a decision next month.
So everything we've talked about today, you're gonna be preparing
Yes.
this sooner rather than later.
I will get started on it as
Okay.
soon as we can. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, with the whole third floor transition stuff is really occupying a lot of time, but definitely as soon as we can, we'll get to all that and try to share as much as we can.
Before next week.
Yeah, definitely before the next meeting as part of the packet, but if I have information and number crunching earlier, then we'll try to get that out to the board.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Right, next two items up are approval of things we talked about, but we don't have them in front of us. So the compensation policy.
Those are in your Dropbox, yeah. It's in the same folder, I believe.
I think this office lease, right?
It's under what?
The office lease? The
They were
last
going to
page?
talk about that in closed session.
Oh, okay.
So the next up is approval of the compensation policy and approval of scale, salary scale. So which folders are they in?
Let's see here. Susie, do you remember which folder it was?
Compensation was given.
Yeah.
And then the
So it's
office-
under staff
it's under
info,
office lease was given.
and then there's salary and position information.
I'm sorry, say again?
Staff info, and then salary and position information.
Staffing.
What was the revised, yeah, there it is, okay. There's a folder called 2023 benchmarking
Right.
and compensation policy.
It's in there,
The easiest way to get to it, honestly, is go to the home button on your Dropbox, where it reverse chronologically lists the recently added files. Just look for the one that says compensation revised.
right, so compensation policy 2018 revised.
The title of it is compensation policy with 2023 revisions, version 3. Okay, very fun. I can come over and help. when needed.
Yeah, I'm not clear which folder we're saying it's in. I thought it was in.
It's okay. Do you mind?
It's alphabetical.
Okay.
Oh, that's the one I said, salary position. And then the 2023 benchmarking.
Great, thank you.
There you go.
Then you have the,
Did you get it?
B3.
Yeah, I have,
Okay.
Okay, section.
and we talked about this last month.
Yes, I made some revisions based on
Right.
feedback.
So we
also
talked
kind
about
of-
this in closed session last month, if you can't vote in closed session, so to approve it, these are documenting the changes we talked about that we said we wanted, so.
So are we discussing this in open session, the questions or follow-up?
I think this is appropriate for one session.
For open, yeah, I think that's okay.
Okay.
Yes? Okay.
So, right, because if we want to vote on it tonight, we have to do that in open, so we can do this and unless there's somebody who has something so confidential they want to discuss, we can save it, we can move it to closed. Samir, I don't know your questions if you think.
I just had a question on bullet point 3, where it says the library director may approve individual pay adjustments based on internal equity, et cetera. And I just was curious, like, how would that work for non-union employees? What would be an example?
Like what the process looks like? Or
Just
how
when would you
how-
approve,
When?
or what's an example of how you would approve somebody to
Okay,
have an
okay,
individual pay
so
adjustment based on internal
let's-
equity for non-union?
Right. So, every year, or prior to, kind of more recently, every year, we have taken just a fresh look, just to kind of see if there's any kind of thing that is just way out of whack or whatever. And so if people have had different, responsibilities added, or the nature of their job changes, or they've had a promotion, obviously that's an obvious one, then there might be a slight adjustment in relation to all the peers, and kind of in terms of comparing different staff to different staff. So that's what that means. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yes, I think so.
Retention efforts just basically.
I mean, I understand about the promotion, but I guess it's the verbiage based on internal equity
That's
that
just
there might
like
be a pay
internal
adjustment.
fairness, like based on for example, if someone has 10 years and they're doing the same job as another person with 5 years, like is it the way it should be, in terms of like how that lays out. So when these days there's not much of that anymore because we've kind of addressed over time, over many years,
Right.
those things. So it shouldn't be this thing where every year there are many people who are adjusted for that reason. It's more along the lines of promotions. Very rarely, I would say, retention efforts, like if someone says, I have another job offer and this is how much they're offering me, and but I can't even remember the last time we did that. So usually, because of our successful recruiting and retention, we haven't had the need to do that as much. So we're pretty confident that we can fill roles with qualified, talented people. So, but it just accounts for the things in between the annual board decisions, so I don't have to come back and ask for minor incremental adjustments.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Other comments or questions on the compensation policy? Not gonna have a motion to approve.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Right, then we'll vote individually. Michelle?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
Ella?
Yes.
Mira?
Yes.
Shadman?
Yes.
I vote yes also, so that passes 6-0.
Thank you.
Next, moving on to approval of the salary scale, which is in the same folder that's labeled post salary scale.
I believe there was general consensus on this, but if the board,
Last time.
if the board has other questions, I'm happy to answer them.
This is
We
basically
saw
the
this
scale.
last month. Go ahead.
Yeah, we discussed this at length
Yes,
last month, right?
yes.
And this is with the help of the firm that we
Yes.
retained.
This part was just tabled because the other part was tabled, essentially, from my understanding.
But as I recall, we discussed it at length. This is based on hiring the outside firm that does all of the industry-wide comparisons. We also looked at what our unique situations are in some categories, and we made small tweaks to that, as I recall.
That's right.
Is that it?
That's
Okay.
right.
And except
So
for
nothing
grade
further
one,
has
they
been
had
changed with regard
Nothing
to the
has been
scale.
changed with the salary scale. from last
Except
year.
for grade one, it had equal step increases with each step.
Right, the gap between,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So again, it's the same as we agreed upon last time.
Okay.
We just couldn't vote on it. If there are no questions, can I have a motion to approve the proposed salary scale?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, we'll go around individually. Shabnam,
Yes.
Mira,
Yes.
Ella,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes.
Michelle.
Yes.
I vote yes also, so that also passes 6-1.
Thank you very much.
Right now, for the office lease, we'll go into closed session. In fact, what we'll do now is, do you want to vote on that tonight if we're done talking about it?
Yes, please. Sorry, was that too desperate? I just realized how.
So we'll move into closed session. When we come out of closed session, presumably, depending on our discussion, we could then vote to approve because it is on the agenda. So, but we can do that when we come out of closed session. So right now, we go into closed session pursuant to Open Meeting Act 5 ILCS under 3 provisions, 120/2C1, compensation of a specific employee, also to discuss C3, selection of a person to fill a public office, and C5, purchase or lease of real property for the use of the public body.
So moved, Jean.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor of going into closed session, Shabna?
Aye.
Mira?
Aye.
Ella?
Aye.
Mary?
Yes.
Michelle?